This is the exact days of 22 years ago. On Friday, I was perpetually professed as an oblate, and then on Saturday, I was ordained a deacon, and then on Sunday was my first opportunity to preach as a deacon, and of course it was this gospel, the second Sunday. And one of my old bosses from when I was in politics came to that Mass, and I was very touched that she came, because it was about a 2-hour drive from where she lived. She was the district director of the congressional office I worked in. And the other thing that made it interesting that she came is she's Jewish. And so she came to Mass. And as I'm prepping, all of a sudden, I didn't know she was coming. So when I get into church, I see her sitting there. And I thought, oh, wow, that's great that she came. I wonder how she'll feel about it saying, for fear of the Jews in the gospel. So I grabbed her and I just said, I don't know if you've ever really heard the Gospels, whatever, but in John's Gospel, this phrase gets used a lot, yada, yada. And I said, I just want you aware of it. I said, are you okay if we just make a little joke of it? She said, yeah. I said, I'm just going to ask you, do we have anything to fear? And you can say no, and we'll laugh and move on. So when we got to Mass, and I said, Ellen, do we have anything to fear? And she stood up and threw up her arms and said, just my cooking. So I can never hear this gospel and not picture her saying that. But I also think of a professor I had in my theology degree. She taught sacramental theology, Meg Lavin, this lovely Irish woman. And one day in class it gets brought up that not only does she teach master's and doctoral level theology, she teaches third grade CCD. And I'm like, whoa, how do you downshift to 8 years old? And she said, in her beautiful Irish accent, I don't know, but it keeps me grounded in my faith. And she said, and here's the thing, I never want to teach anything that needs to be untaught later. And I thought, isn't that so true for all of us? Most of us have run into something we were taught that we then had to confront and go, well, how does that fit together? And often it was taught out of expediency because we're speaking of mystery, and it's hard. And so I offer one to you of today's gospel that I know I've mentioned it before, but it has to do with Thomas. Poor Thomas gets such a bad rap, doubting Thomas. By the way, interesting, if you've never thought about it, Thomas means twin, right? It's not his name. It means twin. And so when it says Thomas, called Didymus, what that really literally means in English is twin, called twin, said that this. We don't actually know his name. We would assume that the apostles knew his name, but that's not his name. It's just what he was. He was a twin. We don't know anything about his twin. But here, this poor guy, what he's known best for is doubting. And yet, and I've submitted to you this before, and that very first time I preached, I brought this up. So he shows up. Jesus shows up. He has this interaction with them. He's not there. And they're all excited, right? Like he gives that greeting, peace be with you. And they don't respond to it. They're just so excited. So he says it a second time, and they're so excited. And all that happens there. And then Thomas shows up, and they're all excited. We've seen the Lord. But I would submit to you, Thomas isn't doubting because he hasn't seen. He's doubting because they are not living in a way that testifies to what they're saying. And we know this because the door is still locked. Right? The door is locked for fear of the Jews. We heard that in the first instance. But if you did not catch, so many days later, they were all there with Thomas, and Jesus came in spite of the door being locked. Why is the door locked now? They already know everything they're ever going to know about him in terms of his power. They know that he's resurrected, right? Why have they locked the door? Because they don't really believe, would be my submit. Or they're just fearful. Whatever the reason, he has already shown them everything he's going to show them, and they were just like, hey, great to see you, hope to see you again, have a great time. Lock the door. And so Thomas shows up, and they're, oh my God, he was here, he's resurrected. And he's like, I don't believe you. I don't believe you because you're not living in a way that testifies to it. In the little book I carry, Give Us This Day, the reflection for today speaks of a performative utterance, which is that in the speaking of it, the outcome happens. I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy. That is a performative utterance. I now declare you man and wife. Those are performative utterances that by saying them, they happen. And so Jesus says, peace be with you. And of course, they don't react to it, so he says it a second time. And then, of course, he takes it that step further. He breathes on them. And we get this book ending that's how God created, right? In that second account, he makes man up from the humus, from the earth, and creates human and breathes the breath of life into them. And that's how humanity comes to be. And then you come here and he breathes the breath of the Holy Spirit into them to change how they live. And like I said, in the short run, they just locked the door. They just weren't ready for whatever reason. But what about us? What is our performative utterances? How do we testify to what we say? Why would the world believe us? And I just hear it so much out in the world. People who claim to be Christian that spend most of their time speaking of fear, anxiety, and cynicism. None of those appear anywhere in the gospel. But they're hooks for humanity, aren't they? And they're not inherently something that has to take us to a dark space. But if we're not rooted in this truth, you know, when they're just the prophets of doom and gloom, when they spend all of their time speaking of what we should be anxious about, what we should be fearful of, and what we should be cynical about. You can't keep drinking that and get healthy. It just can't happen. And so what are our performative utterances? How are our utterances performing? Maybe is a better way to say it. It's just that checkbox for us to say. How do people know that? Well, I look at in my own life. You know, my dad got sick when he was 46. And from the day he was diagnosed to the day he died was about 8 weeks. And his performative utterances around what he believed in terms of life and death, his faith and how those things played out, those were performative to me. That in him saying them, in him praying them, I could say, he believes that. He believes in the resurrection. As he was praying as Jesus did, I don't want this cup, but not my will, but your will be done. And I look at the way my mother has lived her life, before, during, and after, in the experience of my dad's own life. And all the ways in which she's blessed me with her performative utterances. Today is the birthday of my best friend, Father Joe Krupp. And I was able to see him Thursday and Friday. And again, I remember that on this day that I was preaching as a deacon to look and say, and I texted him this morning just to say as he was starting his masses, I just thank God for you, because there have been many times in my life, because he was ordained about 4 years before me, that I could reach out and say, what is this? What do I do with this thing or this feeling or this experience? And he had the wisdom and the grace to be able to show and to share and to utter something that in speaking it happened. The ultimate performative utterance, well, we start our liturgy with one, and it always makes me wrinkle my nose when somebody steps on it. When we started Mass, we made the sign of the cross, and I said, the Lord be with you, and you said, right? That's a performative utterance, and sometimes ministers then go, good morning. And the guy that taught me Presider's Practicum said, when you do that, what you tell the congregation is the actual greeting doesn't mean anything. It's like you said it, and then we said something else. The Lord be with you. It's a performative utterance, and you return it, right? And with your spirit. And then the ultimate performative utterance is coming our way here real shortly. This is my body. Take this, all of you, eat of it. Take you, all of this, all of you, and drink from this cup. It's the cup of the new covenant. And in his speaking it, it happens. But if we don't live in a way that testifies to that belief, right? That's Gandhi, right? Famously, when they asked him about Christians, he had a lot to say about Christians. When they asked him about the Eucharist, he said, well, obviously, I don't believe what you do about it. But if I did, I'd fall on my knees and probably never get up if I really believed that the presence of your God was in that. Simple bread and wine. So how does our utterances, perform in this moment about what we're about to receive? That we know we're all coming to this table unworthy, and Jesus is still beckoning us to it. That as he resurrected, as he conquered sin and death, and we can have tumultuous spaces in our lives, but we've got to be able to be rooted in that peace that he offered them. Peace be with you. And like I said, it's not a once and for all. It's not just intellectual assent to that information. It's taking each and every one of our experiences and the newness and the difficulty of life that changes each and every day. So I was saying to the little ones here, right? Yeah, our lives build. It's not just assent to. Yep, I've said to you before, there's no Scantron test at the pearly gates. Resurrection, strongly agree, some would agree, disagree. Virgin birth, strongly agree, some would agree. No. In the end, it's going to come down to, what did our utterances perform? How do people know the love of God? Because they know us. And we can do that very authentically, and sometimes we have a little fear with it. I understand. But we do want to be authentic in our faith. And so on this Divine Mercy Sunday, on this second Sunday of experiencing Easter, that we hear what he said. We hear him utter that to us. Peace, whatever else is going on in your life, peace be with you, and let it go to the depth of our soul. That whatever on the surface is tumultuous, in the depth of who we are is peace. And we grab hold of that, and we realize it's grabbed hold of us too. So even if we're feeling weak, like we can't hold on to it, it's holding on to us. That's the power that conquers sin and death. That's the power that's going to change these simple gifts of bread and wine to his body and blood. Why? Not for God, but for us. To give us the strength for our daily bread, for our journey today. Journey literally means, in French, journée. Journée is to travel in a day. How far can one move in a day? All we have is today. And today we proclaim his resurrection. Today we performatively utter to each other, peace be with you. Let the Spirit of God be with you. May it dwell within you in this Eucharist, so that today we have an opportunity to testify to life and light and truth and love and his mercy. This world is hungry for it, and they are filled with fear and anxiety and cynicism because they want to make sure that they're as safe as can be. And ironically, the safety of eternal life comes from surrender. And some people just don't want to hear that. They want to think that they can white-knuckle grip it and hold on to it. And Jesus is saying, if that was the way, I would have done it. But the way to life, as Jesus said, if you're trying to save your life, you've already lost. But if you'll give it up for my sake, nobody can take it from you. So I thank you for the ways that you as a community have uttered to me performatively, to love and to share and to challenge and to nurture. It's what strength is. Again, it's why we come here, to taste of his flesh and blood, but also to share that as a community. So let us be strengthened today in his word, in his sacrament, to better support each other here, so that when we go out there, we're really reflecting his light and love. May God be praised.